The Castle in the Attic by Elizabeth Winthrop. Chapter 1. On Monday afternoon, Mrs. Phillips was waiting for William at the kitchen door. He came in shaking like a dog and blowing the raindrops off the tip of his nose. "I still can't do it," he said. She looked disappointed. "What do you mean?" "He added an Arabian dive roll at the end of my floor routine. Before I even get through the handsprings, my legs feel like jelly." "I'll just have to help you practice some more." She turned back to the sink. "Lots of work to do. We don't have that much more time." "The meet is still 6 weeks away," he said as he hung his dripping poncho on the hook by the door. "Sit down, William," she said. "There's something I have to tell you." Her voice had gone suddenly formal and distant. He sat on the stool and wiped off his face with the towel she handed him. "I'm going to be leaving at the end of this month." "For vacation?" "No, for good. I'm moving back to England to live with my brother." "Why?" he asked. "It might sound silly to you, but I'm homesick, even after all these years, and you're getting old enough to take care of yourself." Mrs. Phillips had been with William's family since he was born. 10 years. "I thought you were going to stay until I grew up," he said, still turning the idea around in his mind. He couldn't seem to absorb it. She sat down across the table from him. "Look at me." He shook his head. If he looked at her, he might start crying. "William, you're 10 years old now. You can take care of yourself." "How do you know?" he shouted. He shoved his chair away from the table. "You're not going to leave. I won't let you." He ran out of the room before she could say anything else. Mrs. Phillips owned 2 things that she really cared about. One was a picture of her husband, who'd been killed in World War II, and the other was her mother's pearl circle pin. When she went home to her little apartment in town on the weekends, she left those 2 objects at William's house, where she thought they'd be safer. "When I die, William," she often said, "be sure they bury me with my picture and my pin." On Saturday morning, William took them and hid them in the shoebox that held his rock collection. He knew Mrs. Phillips would never leave without them. She must have noticed they were gone right away, because the first thing she always did on Monday morning was open her top bureau drawer and take them out. When she picked him up from gymnastics practice in the afternoon, she looked at him for a long time without saying anything. He got all ready to lie, but she didn't bring up the subject. On Tuesday, his father and Mrs. Phillips stopped talking the moment he walked into the kitchen. "Hello," William said brightly. Mrs. Phillips turned away without a word. "Hello, William. Finished your homework?" his father asked as he drifted out of the room. His mother was the first one to come out and ask him directly. She was tucking him into bed Wednesday night when she brought it up. "Have you seen Mrs. Phillips' picture? You know, the one of her husband that's always on her bureau? It's missing." "No," said William. He pulled his bear up over his face. "Well, will you please keep an eye out for it? She's also missing a pearl pin that was left to her in her mother's will. Maybe the man who came to fix the furniture last week took it." His mother rambled on, but William wasn't listening anymore. Why didn't Mrs. Phillips come and ask him herself? "I wish she weren't leaving," William said into the middle of one of his mother's sentences. "How come she has to go?" "She misses England, William. That's where her brother lives. When you get older, I guess you'll want to go back to your family." "But we're her family, aren't we?" William asked. "As close as we can be, William," his mother said. "She's been with us for 10 years. That's a long time." She leaned over and hugged him. "Good night. I'll see you in the morning." "Mom?" he called as she started out of the room. "She won't leave without her picture, will she? She told me she wanted to be buried with it." His mother stopped and thought for a moment. "She's made up her mind to go, William. I think she'd even leave her picture behind if she had to." On Friday afternoon, when William got home from school, he tiptoed into Mrs. Phillips' room and put the picture and the pin back on her bureau. When he turned around, she was standing in the doorway. Neither one of them spoke for a long time. "I thought it would make you stay," he said at last. "That's what I thought you thought," she said, putting out her arms. William went and buried his nose in her newly washed dress. He cried a little. She pushed the dark hair off his forehead, swaying back and forth as she hugged him. William held his tears back with his parents, with his friends at school, even Jason, his best friend, but never with her. "You have a gentle heart," she once told him. He pulled away and blew his nose with the linen handkerchief she handed him from her pocket. "I'm not giving up. I'll think of something else to keep you here," he said. "Good," she answered, laughing. "I like my men to fight over me, but I've got a few weapons of my own. When you come home from school on Monday, I'll have a surprise for you." "What kind of a surprise?" he asked. "A big one," she said, "and I'm not going to say one more word about it." Chapter 2. William burst through the back door on Monday afternoon. "Did you bring the surprise?" he asked. He dropped his book bag on the table and began to pace back and forth. "You look like a horse at the starting gate," she said with a laugh. "Of course I did. It's in the attic." William turned to run up the back stairs, but she stopped him. "Wait. I want to be with you when you first see it." "All right," he said. "But hurry up. I've been thinking about it all day." Mrs. Phillips went ahead of him. When they reached the second floor, she stopped in front of the door to the attic. "Now, close your eyes, and I'll lead you up. It was too big a thing to wrap." He put his hand into her large wrinkled one and allowed himself to be led up the last few steps. At the top, she squeezed his hand and let go. "You may look now, William," she whispered. "You brought it!" he cried, gazing down on the enormous stone and wooden castle she had told him about ever since he was little. "It's yours, William. I'm giving it to you." "Forever?" he whispered. "Yes, it's my goodbye present." "Then I don't want it." He sat down on the top step with his back to her and the castle. "Even if you don't take it, William, I will be leaving. I hope I don't have to drag it back to England with me. It belongs here with you." "Why?" William asked without turning around. "I haven't been reading you King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table all these years for nothing." She poked him in the arm, but he didn't answer. "It's more than that. I know that you're the right person for it. You have the kind of soul that accepts the rules of chivalry. If you hadn't turned out the way you did, William, I would never have entrusted the castle to you. I wouldn't give it to just anybody." Her voice seemed to be getting smaller, as if the words were having a hard time finding their way out, and he wondered if she was going to cry. What did she mean by all that stuff about a gentle soul? She seemed to think he was special or something. He didn't like that he cried so easily and was smaller than the other kids in his class, if that was what she meant. "All right," he sighed. "Show me." "We'll start at the drawbridge," she explained, moving around to one side of the castle wall. "Gotta do this thing properly." Down on their hands and knees, with their heads close together, they first inspected the defenses of the castle. "You pull this lever to lower the drawbridge," she said, reaching down inside the front tower of the gatehouse. "Then this chain raises the portcullis, that metal grating just beyond the double wooden doors." "I know what a portcullis is," William said. "I'll take away the wooden bar that holds the doors while you work the chain." William reached inside and pulled. The links of the chain rubbed back and forth between his thumb and index finger. The metal grill disappeared into the wall above. "Good, we're inside," Mrs. Phillips said. "I'll give you the grand tour." With their eyes and fingers, they walked through the lower first floor, opening wooden doors and peering into the round tower rooms of the gatehouse, then across the open courtyard to the stable. If he put his head right inside the courtyard, William could see into the empty stalls. "This is the armory," Miss Phillips explained as she pulled open the small door beyond. "The weapons are kept here." Shields, lances, and tiny swords were attached to the walls. "The kitchen doors slide back. To the left is the buttery, where food and drink are kept cold, and to the right is the scullery, where the dishes are washed up. That door in the corner opens to the tower stairs that lead up to the master chambers." "The kitchen has a fireplace," William said, pleased. "All the main rooms do. Look at the great hall." She slid open the door across the courtyard. On either side of the fireplace, the walls of the large banquet hall were draped with cloth tapestries. Up above, William could just see the minstrels' gallery, where jesters and singers kept their place entertaining the lords and ladies down below. Feel those round circles of metal around the corner? Mrs. Phillips said. He nodded. If you pull on those, the doors to the chapel will open. You can see it from this side through the stained glass window. He pulled, and like magic, the doors opened. He ran his finger across the cold stone floor. Now for the second floor, she said. Both of the rear towers have staircases that lead to the upper chambers, and also on the left and right of the wall walk. These two roof sections lift off, she said, picking them up to reveal the upper story rooms. On this side you see the minstrel's gallery, and then down into the great hall. The other side is the master bedchamber. What's this little room? William asked, poking his finger into a small space next to the bedchamber. That's the wardrobe where the clothes are kept. The two rooms over the armory and the stable are smaller bedrooms for servants or children. You enter them through the main chamber or through the door from the Aloud, which is the correct name for the wall walk. And that's the end of the official tour. William crawled all the way around the castle. He hooked one finger into an arrow loop, blew the dust off the staircase, fastened all the doors. At last, he sat back on his heels. It's wonderful, he said. It's an even better surprise than I thought it would be. I knew you'd like it. Are there any knights? Just one, Mrs. Phillips said, pulling a small box out of the pocket of her sweater and handing it over. Save him for later. Why? He asked. It's a family tradition. You're supposed to meet the Silver Knight on your own. My father made me do it that way, she explained with a shrug. You know me, I love rituals. All right. He put the box down in the middle of the courtyard, even though he wanted very much to open it. But he supposed she was right. For now, the castle was enough. He wanted her to know how much he liked it. The castle is really wonderful, he said again. She looked pleased. Time to start dinner. Just the two of us tonight. Your mother has a school board meeting, and your father went to look at a site. Where did the castle come from? Tell me again, William said at dinner. When they ate alone, they always ate in the kitchen. The checkered curtains, the yeasty smell of Miss Phillips's toast spread with Marmite, and the circle of light that the green-shaded lamp cast around them made William feel cozy in this big, creaky house. She didn't settle into her seat until everything was in place on the table. Their plates, the salt and pepper, honey for her tea, ketchup for his noodles, and chocolate syrup for his milk. I hate to get up in the middle of a meal, she said. You say that every night. And I mean it every night. She poured some honey into her tea. The floating swirls of gold slipped underneath the surface, one little circle after another. Now about that castle. Every family has its own traditions that reach back into their family's history, into one another's times. Some people pass on Bibles or journals or old wedding dresses. My family has always passed on the castle. It goes back as far as my father's great-grandfather, and probably before that, although we don't have certain proof of it. She took a bite and chewed on it thoughtfully. You remember when I went back to England last year? William nodded, his mouth full. I found the castle in my parents' house when my brother Richard and I were clearing it out. That's when I had it shipped to America. All the way from Stow-on-the-Wold, England? Said William. He used this as an excuse to roll that funny name around on his tongue. Now all the way to River Edge Lane, Southbrook, New York, care of William Edward Lawrence, complete with drawbridge, chapel, armory, minstrel's gallery, and one silver knight. The tapioca pudding is in the icebox. None for me tonight. He cleared the table and rinsed the plates. What about the silver knight? He asked, his voice raised to carry over the running water. Has he always been in the castle? As far as I know. I think there might have been other soldiers originally, because my great-grandfather mentioned some in a letter about the castle, but I've never seen them. When I was a child, there was only the Silver Knight. There was some legend that was passed down about him. I remember bits and pieces of it. He was thrown out of his kingdom long ago by an enemy of some sort, and it's said that one day he'll come back to life and return to reclaim his land. But the whole time I played with the castle, he was as stiff and cold as lead. William sat down again. He made paths in his pudding with his spoon before taking the first bite. He wasn't really listening to her story. The question of her leaving hung between them. It took up as much room at the table as he did. "Afterward," he started, his voice almost choking on it, "will I have dinner alone on a night like this?" "Oh, William," she said quietly. When he looked up, she saw tears in her eyes. "Of course not. Don't you see, if I go now, your mother and father will spend more time with you. You and I were almost too close. It leaves other people out." "The castle doesn't make any difference," said William, getting up. "I'm still going to figure out a way to make you stay." Mrs. Phillips didn't say anything, and he went upstairs to start his homework.